Hello tankers and tankettes, it's that time again. Yes, welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 7. We're starting off with a familiar name. Well, they're all familiar names. I'm only getting so many people sending replays to me. This is Yachty, and as you may have noticed by this point, Yachty likes his fast tanks. In this case, it's the T67. What was once upon a time the T49, and is, I think, somewhat different in characteristics from the T49, but it's still a fairly nippy little machine down at tier 5. It's also got a pretty good selection of guns. Now this is very good matchmaking. He's actually got binoculars here along with the premium food consumables, so offhand I've no idea what his view range is, but it's got to be pretty good. And as you can see, actually it might even be up to the max view range, which is 440. I don't know. I would have to run the numbers and look at Tank Inspector and see what that tells me. But as it is, he's basically just trying to provide spotting information for his team. And again, this is a kind of thing that he obviously has done a lot in his scouts, and with his matchmaking, with the setup he's got on this machine, it is, well, not quite a scout, but you know, you can take the scout player out of the scout tanks, but you can't take their urge to scout away entirely. However, as this is a tier 5 match, well, things at tier 5 are generally a bit more organised than they are at, say, tier 2, but sometimes it can not really seem like it. So some of his team are in decent positions, others are not so much so. I mean, he's got a couple of tanks that are right behind him, and actually that's not so good because inadvertently he could end up taking damage while enemy tanks are shooting at the stuff behind him, and that's never what you want when you're trying to passive spot like this, is for people to come and sit nearby you or even behind you, which is frankly just a complete jerk maneuver. There is no excuse for ever doing that, but that can in turn get you shot at even when you're not spotted, even when the enemy has no idea that you're there. So this team, I mean, the enemy team's actually lost more tanks, mostly because of Yachty's spotting, but they're all in very passive positions, and they've already lost one of their top tier heavies, the Churchill, who was not in a great position. We were actually a team member down because the Bishop has just not loaded into battle at all, and with this matchmaking actually the Bishop is at its most effective, so that is another slight disadvantage. Not just the positioning, but the fact that they are essentially 14 versus 15, or were when they started the match anyway. He's also been maintaining very good trigger discipline mostly, but as you'll see, not entirely, because he shot at that Matilda a couple of times, he shot at that 38T, and I'm guessing he was picking and choosing the targets that he thought he would be very safe against in terms of not getting spotted back, because in theory, he is going to have better view range than some of these, but he could have possibly shot at that T1 heavy when he had the opportunity as well. It might just be, however, that he was at that stage unsure about the positions of the enemy tanks. We have more information to that effect at this stage. We know where at least the majority of the remaining enemies are. There's still a couple that aren't spotted. So we didn't really have control. I do get in that habit of, you know, the team, this team, you know what I mean. They didn't really have control of the hill. They didn't even really properly vie for control of the hill. So that Type T34 is able, even though it looks like he's stock from that silhouette, he is able to just press down the 0 line, and there's not that much there to actually immediately oppose him. And he is getting shot at. But as you can see, he's not alone, because there was an AT2 up there as well. And Yachty's actually positioned himself now to make a bit of a quicker getaway, because it looks like that KV-1 from the enemy team is actually advancing across the middle, and there's now not really anything particularly close by to help oppose it. There's an Su-85 which may or may not be in a position to help, but he's pretty low health at this point, and Yachty decides not to risk it. He's just going to pull back a bit here. So the heavies, meanwhile, they're not in great positions, the remaining heavies, the KV-1 and the KV-1S. That KV-1, if he is advancing, is taking his time doing so, so Yachty decides to put a couple of shots towards that T-34, although it does take a few to take him down, and one of the things that limited the effectiveness of the the T49 and now the T67 is the ammunition count. You do have to be a little wary with your shells because it's got a pretty rapid rate of fire and it is entirely possible to run out of shells in a battle. I don't know how it compares exactly, and also like to bear in mind that Yachty is using an interesting loadout. He's actually got 20 premium shells, but I'm guessing he reserves those for higher tier tanks because I don't believe he uses a single one in this battle. Anyway, unfortunately he has timed his getaway a little late maybe. He was perhaps thinking that his teammates would give sufficient fire support to take out that KV-1, and they are actually doing damage. They do actually take him out, but it was a little bit lucky that he didn't take more damage himself there. That one hit alone was enough to shave off nearly half his health, and you don't get a lot of health to work with in tier 5 tank destroyers generally, or just low tier tank destroyers as a rule. Although the AT over there is a little bit of an exception. The Nuffield line of the British always tend to have more hit points for their tier. So at this point, he spies an opportunity. That's an AT2. He is pretty immobile. Yachty has the opposite quality, and rather than just try and snipe his thickly armoured front from afar, try saying that 5 times quickly, he decides he's going to put that mobility to use, get up behind him and do the business, and it works out rather nicely. So he's back to that spotting position, sees the Churchill making a move, which is a bit late in the day considering. You'd think he might have moved up with the KV-1 and maybe tried to make a bit of an armoured push. You know, that would have been a good moment to do that. Both of the heavies going down that flank at the same time may have caused a few more problems. But once again, up the 0 line, and this should at least let him spot the Churchill, maybe even get shots on the Churchill. And at this stage, there's not a lot of the enemy team left, despite having been a tank down the entire time, with that Bishop being not loaded into battle. The Churchill is the last mobile tank of the enemy team. They've also got an artillery, they've also got the FCM-36 Pak 40, which mobile doesn't really apply. It is both fragile and exceedingly slow, but it has a very good gun, so tier 5 engagements in that thing don't matter quite so much, as long as your team's not terrible. You're never going to carry a tier 5, or at least it's going to be very difficult. Anyhow, unexpectedly, there's the AMX-13. And that thing, well, most of the French artillery are pretty mobile over, I think, tier 4 and up. So, a little unexpected finding him up there, but on the other hand, if you're going to play a French artillery, I suppose you might as well use that mobility while you're able to. So there's the last guy, the FCM, who was looking the other way. I think looking at the KV-1 maybe. And Yachty not quite able to get the last kill, but still not a bad result. And you might be looking at the damage alone and thinking, what was, you know, that was an okay game, but it wasn't especially, you know. But as you can see, well, I mentioned that you can't take the, you know, you can take the scout player out the scout tags, but so he got a spotting, what's the one? He got the one for spotting 10 or more members of the enemy team, and he also got patrol duty for lighting up tanks while they were being shot at. And I think it's at least 5 enemy team of the enemy team while they're being shot at. And that was able, on top of his actually decent damage results, only the Su-85 came close. The rest of his team, not so much. And in fact, there was a Matilda that managed to get less XP than the AFK Bishop. But the 1500 spotting combined with the almost 1400 damage done by himself was enough to put him easily on the top of the team. And medals wise, that was probably more of a nice result than in terms of, you know, absolute XP and credits made or anything like that. But it was that ability to light up enemy tanks, it was that ability to move around and do damage that swung the game in their favour in the end. Next up, we have Andy CX in the AT-15. And I actually mentioned one of the Nuffield line in the previous replay, the AT-2. Well, if you keep playing the line long enough through the AT-8, which I didn't like that much, and the AT-7, which I actually thought was pretty decent, you then get to this. Now you'll notice it's not the fastest machine, and in fact Andy is going to spend a lot of the battle in this location, and he did wonder himself if that possibly was a mistake. But honestly, with the AT-15, any battle where you have to move around a lot is probably going to be a battle where you didn't get to do that much damage, because these machines, in common with all of the slower vehicles in game, they can be very good in certain situations, in certain scenarios, and at other times they're totally hopeless because the battle just passes them by. And that's why more mobile tanks, you know, light tanks and medium tanks, are more especially prized by the better players of the game. The game players, that was an awkward way of saying it, the people that play to be good, basically, rather than play for variety or just for enjoyment. I'm not saying either any of those are invalid, you know. People play games for their own reasons, and I think if you want to play the Nuffield line, you have to have your own reasons for doing it. And in my case, it was to get to the tier 10, which is a rather different beast, as you'll know. So this thing has got a 20-pounder gun. It's also got a very, very good rate of fire. And in addition to that, it has an excellent gun arc. In fact, it's got a better gun arc than the machine that follows it, the Tortoise. The armour is also not bad. I mean, that is another defining characteristic of the Nuffield line, is how thick the armour is. And you go from where it's most effective at tier 5 with the AT2 to the Torty at tier 9, where, well, it gets a little bit of a bump at tier 9, but by the time you get to this at tier 8, you've got 200mm just about of frontal armour. And by this point, there are plenty of guns that can pen that. And the entire line as well also has definitely got fairly prominent weak spots. If you don't know what the weak spot on an AT series is, well, just shoot for a sticky up bit from the top and bingo, Bob's your uncle. Now, he has actually taken some damage already, and one or two shots were actually a little bit unlucky, because the first CDC shot that tracked him, well, it's got very good side armour. You can actually side scrape in these things, although, you know, it's a fixed casement tank destroyer. Side scraping is not necessarily what you want to do in terms of being able to then fire back at people, but in terms of bouncing shells, this can do it. The shots after that, well, I think they were just they were at range shots, and keeping your enemies at range in these slow machines is what you want to do ideally. You want other people to be spotting for you, although he has got binoculars himself here, and then you want to be able to pin somebody down, preferably in the open with the rate of fire, and keeping somebody permatracked with the speed that you can get the shots out with this gun is particularly easy to do. But it does leave you a bit more dependent on your team, and so that being the case, we shall look at what the team's doing. Well, we're almost just over the 5-minute mark, in fact sort of 4.5-minute mark. Yeah, I know what I just said. Caption guy's going to pick up on that, isn't it? And it's taken the team... Well, they've managed to push up the 1-2 line, but this is an encounter battle, and pushing up the 1-2 line, it works best when there are fewer enemies around there and in the middle. But they have encountered significant resistance in the middle, and we've also never really had control of the hill. And he actually took a shot from the enemy T71 from the hill. And I don't think it's going to be a spoiler to say the T71 on the enemy team has a really good result by the end of this. But as it's happened, as it's worked out, his team hasn't really been able to take control, and we are now actually down on numbers in a pretty bad way. The only kills that have been made by this team have been on scouts. One of them was by Andy right at the start. I mean, he's going to get another one, I think, fairly soon. I can't remember if it's the IS or the T29, but one of these guys is about to know the pain of 20-pounder spam. There we go. It is the T29. So this is what you want. The guy gets tracked, goes for another tracking shot. He's repaired, but look at this rate of fire. And the side hull of a T29 is just such easy prey for this gun. I mean, the 20-pounder is a really nice gun. I think the only big fly in the ointment is the fact that the shells, for the damage that they do, are pretty absurdly expensive, and it's one of these wargaming balance decisions where it really doesn't make any sense. All of the 20-pounder equipped machines are quite expensive to run, and this is no exception. Anyway, this SU-122-44 possibly can't even see what is shooting at him, because that thing doesn't have a good view range, so he too is about to meet his end, and that has put Andy a little bit over 3,000 damage, which is not a bad result so far. They've also brought it back to 6-6. But still, the enemy team map-wise, well, in theory, it's actually about even. But they control, I think, more of the vital areas, and the hill in particular, and that is enough to give them the advantage. So they haven't really taken control of the 1-2-3 line despite having a fairly heavy presence there. We've also got a Tiger who is either AFK or botting, not sure which. So again, this is a game where it was effectively 14 versus 15, and that's never fun. But it is particularly not having had control of the hill up until now. Although, having cleared it out a bit, I mean the T71 was up there but seems to have gone away. But it does just seem to be now that KV5. What's facing him, though, is a machine... Well, it's a machine that the KV5 can fairly easily hurt, and it's also a machine that isn't known for particularly having a great gun pen-wise, but still, again, weak spots. The KV5's weak spot is pretty well known by this point, so I'm a little bit surprised the T69 wasn't able to just get a clip off into the Radio Man's... binnacle on the KV5 and do some damage that way, and instead he just backs all the way off. I think he manages to get a hit in there. It's possible, if that was from the T69, that he's got his stock gun, but even so, you're going to see it ends up being Andy that does the vast majority of damage to this guy. And again, this is where the gun handling comes in very useful, where the rate of fire comes in very useful, because with, say, a Russian tank destroyer gun, you know, if this was an ISU, you would hopefully be able to hit him once for a lot of damage, but then you'd have to sit and reload for a very long time, and if you were unlucky with your shot at 345 meters, 350 meters, then you've still got the long reload, but you've done no damage at all. So this is maybe one of those situations where it's actually preferable to have that high rate of fire. And because the KV5's gun itself is not particularly accurate compared to this, unless Andy gets unlucky, although the guy is returning fire, he is unlikely to do any particular damage to him in return. Meanwhile, unfortunately, the rest of his team has pretty much collapsed. There's a Walker Bulldog and that T69, and that's all that is left. And Andy's going to have to rapidly move if he wants to not die. Well, there's also the Tiger, but as I say, the Tiger's been AFK the entire battle, so I don't think we're going to count him. So it's come down to this. He's shot almost all of his ammo. Even if the enemy team were all really quite low health, it is entirely possible he would not have enough ammunition to actually do anything about it. And that's a bit unfortunate. I'm also aware the frame rate is going a bit wonky all over the place. And yes, that final ram kill. So I don't know why that is. The frame rate with 9.9 replays is usually fairly reliable, but it just tanked down to about 20 frames per second there, for no reason, excuse me. But yes, this is not looking good. He's now having to hope that between the three of them they can coordinate well enough to take these people down. And there's no artillery to worry about, at least. But the enemy tanks, well, the Centurion's got a 20-pounder himself, and again the frame rate's being a bit wonky, don't know why. The T69 is very, very low health, and the Walker Bulldog, well, it's got a good gun, but oh, there's the enemy T69 slinging heat around. The Walker Bulldog is a light tank, and so he can't take that much punishment. Unfortunately, the Centurion, as you can see, well, still fairly healthy, and I think the IS-6, I can't remember if we see him before the battle ends, but even if he doesn't have that much health left, he's still in an IS-6, you know, he's still got pretty bouncy armour. So there's just the closing chapters of this battle now, really. They know, the enemy team know where the remaining tanks are. They possibly don't know Andy's position quite exactly, but they know he won't have been able to get far because this thing is as slow as the rest of the AT series. It looks like the T69 is going to peek over that escarpment there. Escarpment? What do I mean? I don't know. Something. That embankment. There we go. That was the word I was looking for. And he does get a shot into the guy, but it bounces off. And it might be the fact that APCR, if you don't know, gets less normalization. The shell doesn't turn in as much when it hits the armor. It's got a couple degrees less than regular AP. So it's possible if you had AP left, that shot would have actually done something, or it might still have skidded off that turret at what could have been an auto bounce angle. We don't know. So yeah, enemy team just, yeah, picking them off one by one. There's no massive rush here. They've still got a couple of minutes left of this battle, and they don't have to rush in and sacrifice themselves one by one, and they would be a bit silly to do so at this point. And in fact, two of the remaining players are both platooned up. So, and there we go, the I6 actually pretty low health. And he gets just the last kill, but unfortunately, he's the last tank left alive, and he's not going to be around too much longer himself. So that was over 5,000 damage done. That was, for him, pretty good result. And for an AT-15, that was a very good result indeed. A high caliber, and he also got a cool headed there for bouncing a lot of shells. Or is it a Spartan? I can never tell the difference between the two. And it was also an ace mastery on a defeat. And you might be thinking, well, what was the rest of his team doing? There were a few that had an okay-ish result, but on the whole, not enough people were doing enough damage. And as it turned out, the Tiger that was sitting all the way at the back must have been a bot, because he had 1,600 damage. So not AFK, definitely a bot or just a really terrible player. Sometimes it's hard to tell. But even so, with the high ammo cost, with a premium account, he was still able to walk away with a pretty decent number of credits. I think he still would have been able to walk away with his head held fairly high, because honestly, I'm not quite sure what more he could have done in an AT-15 in that battle. Maybe if he'd been on the other flank, he might have made that push work better, but on the other hand, the flank that he was on would have had a lot more high health enemies running around on it, because he wouldn't have been there doing all that damage, and the rest of his team didn't especially seem to be doing all that much on his side. So maybe that one was inevitable. Yeah, you can just never quite tell with World of Tanks, but I still think he did a pretty good job there overall. Lastly, we have Island Man in the good old Sherman Jumbo, the E2. He's actually using the stock turret here, and there aren't that many vehicles in World of Tanks where you would want to deliberately do that. Generally speaking, an upgraded turret means more hit points, more armor, better view range, better rate of fire, the ability to mount better guns. And so therefore you'd have to have some pretty big advantage from sacrificing that potential. And in the case of the Sherman Jumbo, it is actually the fact that the stock turret has better armor than the top turret that leads a lot of people to continue using it. Now, for that you give up a few hit points. You also give up the ability to use the upgraded 76mm gun, but you still get, as you can see here, a pretty decent one to use, the M1A1, with the upgraded one being the M1A2, which I think gets just better handling stats, better rate of fire. There's also, of course, the derp gun, which you see a lot of people using, and back before the Great Heat nerf, this and the Easy 8, the Sherman, I almost said Sherman 4 there, that's another thing, the Sherman and the Panzer 4, and even the M10 Wolverine could all mount that 105mm derp, and of course the Hetzer as well, very famously. And even against tier 8s, it had enough penetration that it was fairly effective. And these days, well, you still see a lot of people using them because it is fairly guaranteed damage. But Island Man in his email said that he actually doesn't like using the derp on this machine. He doesn't like derp guns that much generally, apart from obviously on the KV2. Now he's just been sitting here bouncing stuff from, well, I don't know what that KV-85's been doing to be honest, but that and the KV-1 quite comfortably. And you can, with this kind of matchmaking, use this almost as a substitute heavy tank. It can be very effective at that, and I've done it myself. This is actually, of the Easy 8 and the Jumbo, it's the Jumbo that I kept. Although I've got a Fury now as well, which is basically just an Easy 8 with some gubbins on it. But in this case, well, it is one of those 105mm derps that is finally doing damage to him. Although he took an AP hit from a Cheeto as well, which has a pretty nice gun. But whereas the whatever caliber gun the KV-85 was using, whereas that HE was unable to do any damage, the Panzer IV actually did a little bit more, and Island Man, well, you could see him reacting there. He was paying attention to what was going on the minimap. He knew he was about to start getting shot in the side, so positioned himself accordingly. So they've reacted well there. There's a couple of tanks still left up there, and yes, I don't know why this replay is doing that. The 9.x replays generally, I mean, you'll have seen this on my own channel, on other people's channels. When they upgraded whatever they did to Big World with, I think was it a new lighting engine? I can't remember. It was something like that in the 9.0, and of course all the high-res HD. I keep wanting to say high density. No, it's not high density. It's late. High definition. There we go. I'm having a good time remembering my words this evening. And that also came along with the 9.0 as well. But unfortunately for us YouTubers, yeah, the problems with replays have been perennial, and they have gotten better as the 9.x replays have got 9.x versions have gone along, but they haven't entirely gone away. It's just demolishing that Panzer III-4, who was just sat out in the open. That was not a good plan. Meanwhile, the KV-85 and the KV-1 creeping up again, but Island Man demonstrating a fairly good knowledge of weak spot. A fairly good knowledge of weak spot knowledge. Yeah, I don't know. It's late. It's late. But honestly, he could have shot the KV-1's lower plate and gotten a much better result out of it. Now that KV-85 actually looks like he's using a stock 85 build gun. And hello. Turns out that Panzer 38 NA, well, that's officer class thinking right there, is actually trying to flank somebody while they are engaged with somebody else, even in not particularly good little tank like the 38 NA, and it could be good if it had better matchmaking, but as it is, it's really not particularly great. But despite taking a bit of damage, despite losing his radio man, which is really not that important, he has come out on top. Now, unfortunately, as for the rest of the team, well, some of them put up an okay accounting of themselves, but it is just now down to 4 versus 4. So we're fairly even, and there we go, 4 versus 3. But it is not a definite certain thing yet. However, it looks like he's about to even the scores. Unfortunately, RNGesus steps in and says, nope. And that bounce is going to be costly because, well, this particular KV-85 does have his top gun. Now, fortunately, he's not using the 122mm, otherwise he would be dead right now. But even so, that gun has got the 100mm. That is the gun of choice on the KV-85. It has nice penetration and nice damage, and was able to hurt Island Man rather badly. However, Island Man used his brain, realised he only needed to do a little bit more damage, loaded HE, and although 76mm HE doesn't do much, he didn't have to do much. That was sufficient. The KV-85, meanwhile, pushed round onto the enemy cap and is having a go at capping, but lo and behold, there's a KV-2. Now, he does get a good hit into the KV-2, and Island Man, in theory, has shots from up here. However, there may well be buildings in the way, so it's going to be handy that he's still got a fair whack of ammo left, because he does a little redevelopment, shall we say, a bit of American-style urban redevelopment. Yes, I know there'll be comments, but the SU-100 and the KV-2 are between them going to take down that KV-85. However, Island Man's team, and Island Man's got a Radley Walters now, by the way. They are going to... Oh, no, but KV-85 survives, or does he? I seem to remember him not surviving, having watched this the first time round. But see, now I was right. I'm second-guessing myself. I should just not do that. But yeah, a bit more demolition, and there we go. There's the kill shot. Or it would be. Any moment now. There we go. RNGesus, stop trolling me as well. So Radley Walters, a steel wall, another cool-headed, high-caliber, top gun, and a mastery. And that shows that you don't need the derp to do good in an E2. And if you're going to use the 76mm, well, there's an argument that you might as well use the top turret so you can use the M1A2 and get the better stats with that gun. But even so, and I don't know why I've put that upside down, but he's top of the team, 1400 XP, easily top of the team. The KV-85 did alright as well, and the rest of his team, not so much. So it's probably a good thing that he did that 3000 damage and those 9 kills. That was almost a pools medal, in fact. And I think it's fair to say that he actually carried that team rather nicely. Now you might notice on the final screen over 3000 blocked damage. There's not that many medium tanks, certainly not the mid tiers where you could do that. Back in the day, the VK3601H, before it was a heavy tank, when it was still a medium, possibly you could have gotten that kind of result with that machine. I remember particularly being fond of that. These days it's just a kind of a so-so mid-tier heavy tank, but it used to be a very nice medium, and there are still echoes of that in the E2 as well. So that's just about it for this particular batch of replays. I hope you've enjoyed them, and if you have, you can leave any comments below, you can hit the like button, you can subscribe to my channel, and as always, stay tuned for more.